The insidious neighbor tries to steal our house and gets what she deserves when she is hit with a $200,000 debt for her own deeds. The protagonists need to be introduced before we begin. The spoiled son of an entitled neighbor shall be abbreviated as S from now on, while the entitled neighbor will be referred to as N from now on. The prior owner of our house, who will only play a minor role in this narrative, will also be introduced. It has been over 15 years since we acquired the house, so bear that in mind as you read this. It follows that, barring any indication to the contrary, a considerable amount of time passed between the majority of the occurrences. Come on, we can begin. I feel obligated to provide some context for what happened before so that the climax may be appropriately built up. The bulk of these events occurred prior to our purchase and relocation to this residence. So, N possessed a sizable parcel of land that was adjacent to a well-liked local recreational lake. Despite my assertion that it is down the road, the real distance is very considerable. Despite the fact that N's road is the sole one that connects many lakefront estates and resorts, as well as the busiest boat port on this stretch of the lake. While the residences here may not be out of reach for the average person, there are some really valuable properties farther down the road that are frequented by the super-rich. Later on in the plot, this will become significant. When Karen's children reached legal age, she divided her enormous estate into 4 almost equal halves because she was very rich and owned a lot of land. She handed one to her daughter, who, in comparison to her relatives, is quite good-natured. S was then given an additional segment. She largely followed her children's requirements when she constructed residences for them on both of the lots. She proceeded to construct a little convenience store on the 4th parcel of land, which was devoid of her own residence. In the long run, this will matter as well. For some reason, she ended up transferring ownership of her home and property to her children. I don't know why, but it was likely to head off any potential conflicts in the future. I think you have a good idea of where this is heading. Although the girl was rather decent, he was a wild child when it came to parties. Or maybe I should say his son was careless. At the time, he was loathed by everyone in the area. Every night, he would host incessantly rowdy parties that would keep people up all night long. Due to the high volume of calls to him, the police presumably had an operative stationed nearby. His spoiled attitude was likely exacerbated by the fact that his mother footed the payment and retained the money in her name. Everything that went to her mailbox, water, electricity, trash, you name it, went there. Every single one, that is. He never paid the property tax since it was in his name. Instead, he disregarded it. It seems that N either didn't give it any thought or thought he was footing the bill alone. The arrival of the police at his residence was, in any case, expected. However, it did when his absence caused the house to be put up for auction. Currently, the home was a complete mess. There were holes in the drywall and a massive one in the floor of the living room that led to the basement/garage. The house was deemed uninhabitable by the banks due to his carelessness and excessive partying, which necessitated the complete replacement of the kitchen floor and subfloor as well as nearly all of the walls. Consequently, only individuals who could afford to pay cash could buy it. Come on, P.O. was more of a casual investor. Post office. Real estate than anything else. He was not one of the mega-rich real estate moguls you see on television. As a way to stay active and occupied after retiring, he flipped properties. P.O. would purchase an inexpensive home like this one at auction, make the necessary repairs, and then resell it. The profit from the previous property would cover his expenses while he fixed up this one, and by the time he was ready to buy the next one, his profit would usually be almost gone. He just put any surplus money into an emergency fund, which he stated wasn't anything extraordinary. This place seemed perfect on a website for sale. It was the right size, in the right neighborhood, and even across the street from the lake, which we love for fishing and boating. So it was practically ideal in every way. We were looking for a new place to live, but we couldn't afford anything too expensive. It appeared that way, anyhow. Because it wasn't posted on the website quite yet, we were terrified of the price. Looking into it, though, wouldn't hurt. We discovered P.O. as we drove by to have a look on the case. We wanted to drop over and say hello and get a price quote. He went on to say that he intended to sell it after some repairs and that his realtor had just entered it into the database for quicker and more efficient searching when the time came to sell. He seemed to enjoy our company, and we had a pleasant conversation about being kind and all. Considering its present state and the effort it has already undergone, we informed him that we would be ready to purchase it from him for a fair price. He was halfway through the process. In our conversation, we shared our dream of completing the house and making it our permanent residence. He declined, saying he had other bids and didn't feel comfortable selling it to us. He added that we may pay the full amount after he was done. We politely thanked him and gave him our information, requesting that he give us a call in the event that he reconsidered. And he said he would. We were surprised to get an unexpected call from him less than 2 weeks after that. His sister had become ill in another state, and he wanted to go there with her, so he said he wouldn't be able to do the housework. He said the house wasn't code compliant, but he'd be willing to sell it to us for a fair price if we could figure out how to acquire it. In a heartfelt agreement, we set out to find banks. Our real estate agent acquaintance put us in touch with a bank that was ready to lend us the money to purchase the property, but there were some strings attached. Basically, we would only have 2 weeks to fix the house so it complies with building codes. After that, they may foreclose and sell it at auction. Upon hearing the details, P.O. volunteered to pitch in how he could. Because he came in such a hurry, he was unable to perform any work on the house. However, he detailed everything we needed to do to make it code compliant and satisfy the minimal standards, including the time and effort required, the cost, and the estimated timeline. Aside from that, he suggested additional ways he might help us. We borrowed twice as much as he asked for the house, and he returned half of it. The house needed repairs, so we put that money toward those. He had already done so much to get the house up to code that we could have done it alone. Nevertheless, we enlisted the help of some friends just in case and finished in half the time. There was still a lot of work to be done once it was brought up to code, so we spent months redoing flooring and subflooring and rewiring the whole structure. Creating holes in the walls to replace the old, unsightly wallpaper that was adhered directly to the drywall and was physically rotting. I hope you understand. A lot of effort went into the place. After that, we were able to close on our ideal house. We planned to address the other concerns as we progressed. However, the day has come to move in. Anne dropped over to introduce herself before we had even completed moving in. Over the course of our brief time together, P.O. repeatedly cautioned us about Anne's spoiled brat mentality. We didn't see why P.O. had been so wary of Anne at first because she was so kind. And then it transpired. She gently and compassionately informed us as our meeting came to a close that the house really belonged to her and that we were given 30 days to go. She claimed to feel terrible for us because we were so ripped off, but the home was really hers, and the P.O. had no legal authority to sell it to us. You can imagine our shock and dismay as she told us the whole story. We had heard terrible tales of individuals falling victim to scams like that before. Worst of all, we were about to lose our dream house. The culmination of all our hard work and financial investment. Because we had fallen for some guy's swindle. We expressed our gratitude for her helpful explanation and assured her that we will address the matter with the bank and P.O. Then we did what the bank and realtor both said. We verified with the bank that P.O. was the rightful owner of the deed. We had a conversation with P.O., and she informed us that she frequently harassed him over the home and accused him of stealing it after he purchased it at auction. The accounts were identical from every single person we talked to. In fact, we verified our inclusion on the deed by visiting the courts. It was around this time that we learned S's history from other neighbors. Not long after that, N stopped by to inquire about the expected moving date. It wasn't our fault that S lost the item, and we stressed that this would never happen since we legally own it. We conveyed our condolences for her loss and acknowledged the difficulty of her son's carelessness in causing the family property to be in such disrepair. However, we insisted that she not receive the property that we had purchased with our own funds and painstakingly restored. Then, upon discovering that we were aware of the issue, N proceeded to launch into a lengthy emotional tirade about the property's long-standing family connection and the overwhelming pain of losing it. She blamed P.O., who had taken it during the chaos surrounding their child's detention. After he lost the bid for the house, we wanted to know why they didn't just purchase it back. They could have gotten it back for close to nothing at auction, given that we only paid around $50,000 for it from P.O. and that he was still earning a modest profit on it despite all the effort and materials he had put on it before selling it to us. N detailed how she and her family thought their home and possessions were being taken from them and how they would never agree to pay for what was rightly theirs. We expressed our deepest regrets once again but made it clear that we could not afford to lose money on the property. Not after all the work we had put into it and the extra supplies we had purchased for her sake. Still, we felt bad for her and offered to sell her the house for $100,000, which was a steal in her condition. Even taking into account its location and the extent of its renovations, that amounted to somewhat more than half of its whole market worth. We thought it was a fair price after spending an extra $30,000 on supplies and putting in a number of months of hard work to fix it up, on top of the $50,000 we received from P.O. Although we remained silent, we would be open to negotiating a price as low as $90,000 if she was interested. She quickly countered with $40,000, stating her right to own the item outright and refusing to pay for it. We told her it was ridiculously cheap, and she stated that she was sympathetic and would be happy to throw in an additional $10,000 to cover all the work we had done to the house because she knew how much we had invested. She became angry and accused us of being dishonest and criminals when we informed her that we had purchased the property from P.O. for $50,000, claiming the house was in disrepair and had no value at all. She had already begun to call us names and had gone so far as to say that our dream home was a dump, despite the fact that we had invested so much time, energy, and money into it. We politely requested that she vacate our premises, stating that we no longer welcomed her and that we would not sell our property to her, no matter how much money she offered, because we had had enough of her bullshit. She stormed out the door cursing and swearing at us, clearly agitated by this. We later learned that she had been circulating baseless accusations against us across the neighborhood, including the idea that we had stolen her house. We chose to disregard it at first, assuming that nobody would believe us. However, our world turned upside down when a man brandished a pistol and demanded that we evacuate immediately. We were familiar with his name, but we had never met him in person. It seems like he saw himself as the neighborhood watchman and would confront troublemakers for their antics. Though we live in a rural area with a fair share of lawbreakers, the majority of our neighbors thought he was a reasonable man and were grateful for his presence. He went above and beyond what the police did, for the most part, to ensure that the area remained calm. I wanted to mention that there are two main areas to our neighborhood. Older retirees make up the majority of one sector, which is lovely and quiet, and everyone gets along. On the opposite side, farther into the forest, away from curious eyes, live the less law-abiding folk. We enjoy being on the brink of tranquility. We had heard of him before and assumed, based on reports, that this was the same person, so we decided to test that idea. We were separated by perhaps a mile or so of woods and fields. We admitted to him that we were confused and asked him over for some beer and conversation. We informed him that we would also be carrying our own rifle, but we still let him bring his. My town is incredibly gun-friendly. For what it's worth, there are more gun stores than dollar stores. He merely wanted to show that he could protect himself if things got out of hand, so we weren't too concerned that he was carrying a gun. A weapon that doesn't carry much weight in our area. A distinct situation might arise if it had been directed against you, but he did not. Now let's return to the main plot. After a few hours of talking and clarifying the matter, he admitted that he had assumed such and apologized for the confusion. He said he became engrossed in the rumors, turned a switch, and the incident never happened again. After he said that everyone was pleased after the ass moved out, he thanked us for purchasing it. He spared himself the anguish of listening to the cries of those who were upset by the late-night stumbling of inebriated teens and the deafening din of their music. Afterwards, we all laughed it off, and he walked away silently. Finally, we can get to the bottom of why Mr. Peacekeeper bought into the rumor so readily. Although it's not the main plot, this is a pivotal moment when N's luck began to decline. Furthermore, I feel compelled to mention that there is some crossover between this side tale and the continuation of the plot. But now we can begin. Anne, as I said before, built a convenience store on a quarter of her land. As you can expect, the locals loved this business. Its prime placement in the heart of everything made it ideal. Not only was their pricing exorbitant, but their customer service, which included Anne's role of essentially only thanking you for your purchase as you left, was also much disapproved of. At times. However, If you discovered mold on the food you purchased from them, they would gladly offer you a refund. The fact that they were the sole convenience shop for miles contributed to their popularity, nonetheless. For the majority of residents, they were a mere hop, skip, and a jump away from the town center, making them an ideal alternative to driving all the way there to get groceries. Even though we had our disagreements, we shopped there several times. You can't help but notice that they were right close to us. Aside from that, though, they were well known in our area because of the success of their little business. Quite optimistic. They would dare anyone to try and take their convenient small business away from them since everyone wanted to keep it. To some extent, I can understand the feeling expressed there. That was in the past, when Anne and her family were generally regarded as decent individuals. People were quick to believe Anne's rumors when she started spreading them. Everyone realized how absurd the idea was that we stole her entire house, so it quickly died down. However, her credibility was still generally upheld. Trust me, there were a lot of rumors, but many did believe them. But they were mainly little trifles that garnered zero attention. Let me just add that there was a lot more dirt on other folks in our area, even if the stories were accurate about us. It follows that they were completely ignored. They tried their best to keep us to ourselves, though, because Anne clearly had a grudge against us, and nobody dared get on her bad side for fear of expulsion from her business. Even though S had nowhere else to go, he was able to get out of prison after a few years. Instead of letting him live with her mother, she rented him an apartment above her convenience store and made it clear that she would never again tolerate any kind of crazy parties on her property. However, he was exempt from paying rent in reality. When they weren't around, which wasn't often, he was just required to manage the business. Nonetheless, it is clear that Anne did not learn his lesson, despite everything that transpired. It was common for him to ring up products twice and keep the difference in his pocket while he was working the register. This happened many times, so we returned for a refund each time. Every time, they pretended the register was malfunctioning. We alerted Anne to the matter after hearing a patter, though, acknowledging that her son was likely taking advantage of people by charging twice for the same thing. We liked Anne's tiny shop and didn't want anything bad to happen to it, and even though she was rather entitled, she didn't go to such extreme lengths as to do anything so plainly wrong. But rather than expressing gratitude for our alerting her to the matter, she kindly informed us that we were hallucinating and advised us to leave well enough alone. We dutifully followed her suggestion. In addition, we informed a few of our neighbors about it. It took Anne a long time, but now some of them would even look at us, much less speak to us. Finally, though, we had made pals. An easy approach to making someone's Christmas season is to provide them goodies. Even though they were honest about their lack of belief, they yet thanked us. Nonetheless, news got around the neighborhood quite fast. Mr. Peacekeeper then came racing over. Once again, he parked in our driveway. Since he knew the stories about us were mainly false, he was nicer this time and paid them little mind. Not on any major issues, but on more amicable terms. We had spoken to him many times after that. Occasionally, he would swing over for a beer, at which time he would simply chit-chat about local events and solicit our thoughts on various matters. He maintained this level of communication with everyone, checking in with the majority of them once a year to keep them informed and ensure that everything stayed peaceful. Because he disliked the thought of the cops being around, he resolved to improve their efficiency so that they wouldn't be needed. This agreement was well received by all parties involved, including ourselves. That meant you could send your children unsupervised down to the lake, even if it meant they had to stroll through some sketchy portions of the neighborhood. The tales we were spreading about our neighbors, particularly their tiny business, were greatly disliked by him. He went on to say that he had already spoken with them and that they had confirmed his suspicions that the confusion stemmed from registration difficulties and that, if they really wanted to avoid trouble, they would put an end to the rumors immediately. We aimed to provide him with evidence. Even if we did, we were aware that he would likely not believe us. They dismissed it as a register mistake, so we weren't likely to be able to persuade him. He had a strong preference for Anne's word over ours. Therefore, we consented and expressed our apologies for any problems, clarifying that we were only hurt and wanted to safeguard the few acquaintances we had established in the area. He silently accepted our apologies, issued one last warning, and then departed. After giving it some thought, we decided to avoid buying there until absolutely necessary. However, following a few further years, everything shifted. The word got across the neighborhood when we brought it to everyone's attention. Despite Mr. Peacekeeper explicitly telling everyone that the rumors were generated by us due to our property quarrel with Anne, we continued to spread them. I'll get to it later on, but as we started detecting trends, other customers began to pay closer attention to their receipts when they shopped there. Anne undoubtedly knew about the swindling sums of money that he was pocketing throughout this period, but she did nothing to stop him and instead tried to calm people down by spreading falsehoods. But that's the issue with mom-and-pop shops in rural areas. The regulars in the area where they set up shop are crucial to their survival. They generate a ton of money in the summer when everyone is on vacation, but that's not nearly enough to get them through the winter. It transpired thereafter. At last, Mr. Peacekeeper made a connection. His anger was palpable. Even next door, we could hear him yelling obscenities at himself and others. How fulfilling that was, you just cannot fathom. However, that was just the start. In addition to going on the attack, he informed every single individual in the neighborhood about their actions that very day, going door to door and even bringing a stack of receipts to prove it to anybody who asked to see them. Mr. Peacekeeper was the most trusted man in the area, even more so than Anne. He had utterly destroyed their company in the span of a day. The entire neighborhood ceased to attend. Due to inexperienced tourists and winter birds, they were nevertheless able to do rather well throughout the summer. But their financial situation deteriorated after winter arrived and the tourists departed. They were compelled to shut down their business for the winter after 2 winters. On the other hand, it meant they had to replace more than 90% of their inventory every spring after throwing out the old stuff every autumn. After 3 more years, they finally shut down for good, I suppose because it wasn't very cost-effective. At that point, their standing in the community began to decline. As a result, we began to receive more respect from others and were able to strike up conversations and form friendships naturally. People stopped treating us like a disease and stopped ignoring us. Unfortunately, that was only the start of Anne's decline. It will take a short book, but I don't believe it will be too long before I can get to the story's conclusion. Something that Anne possesses is a very, and I do mean incredibly, intrusive nature. No matter how far away we travel, she always seems to be watching us from her window, whether she's walking her dog, raking the grass, pulling weeds, or some other fictitious reason. You can almost be sure that she is outside if we are taking a stroll around our property. We are not hiding anything, but we aren't exactly on good terms with her, and we certainly don't enjoy having someone watching our every move. I don't think anybody should be seeing us when we soak in our swimsuits in the backyard pool and hot tub that we're planning to install. Consideration of a privacy fence was so initiated. As good neighbors, we wanted to let Anne know that we were planning to build a fence. She was passionately against it, so we clarified that it would be a privacy fence. We offered to talk to her about the fence's specifics, its color, shape, etc., since we still had to live with her. She appeared to like glancing at our land, so we wanted to make sure she wouldn't have to look at anything she found unsightly all day long. Despite everything she has done to us, we still strive to be the greatest neighbors we can be. Continue with the plot, though. We intend to place the fence 1 foot beyond our property boundary throughout the whole property line to avoid any potential arguments over its placement. To make sure there are no disagreements, BTW. This is SIL. We paid to have a copy of the deed and a map of our property borders made at the courts before S was released from jail. And claimed a little shed and a garden on approximately 1/3 of our land, which astonished us to no end. A real row of trees does in fact traverse our land. Its form is more akin to a half hexagon or a trapezoid than a straight box, as is the case in certain states. Where I reside, strange property lines are rather typical. The deed and property map show what appears to be a little triangular area of our land, but when you include the trees, it becomes a square. It seemed like Anne was asserting her ownership of the land beyond the trees. Again, she went ballistic when we brought this up to her, accusing us of being dishonest and stealing from her. We had lived here for years on the false impression that the land belonged to her, so we didn't give a hoot about it. Therefore, we proposed selling it to her or exchanging it for some of her property in order to make things simpler for everyone. A really inconvenient piece of her land that bordered ours could be easily extended, making it simpler to deal with and providing us with more area to do what we wanted to do. The woman firmly rejected, stating that she would never part with her own property without compensation and that she would never consider giving it to us again, particularly considering that we had previously stolen it. Ever since then, we have been embroiled in a massive, never-ending property fight. Let me tell you a little bit about my home. It is a rural region with numerous peculiar property lines, as I indicated before. Also, property lines aren't always clear-cut. Rather than stating X feet in Y direction, many antique documents employ more ephemeral markers, such as a big boulder along a creek or a great oak tree. It is possible that some of these markers are describing more than one object, or that they vanished more than a century ago. It would be an understatement to claim that our area is home to numerous property disputes. Because of this, and the fact that even a tiny plot of land may fetch a pretty penny in some cases, our state has enacted a plethora of stringent rules and regulations pertaining to surveyors, property disputes, etc. Just so you know, there was this landowner a few years back who made over $1 million after winning a property battle with a huge business over 0.1 acres of land that belonged to the corporation. Get back on track. Given that she had only lately drawn out the boundaries of our land, everything seemed rather clear. But it doesn't alter the reality that there are stringent regulations on the subject, especially in the case of surveyors. Thus, in cases like the one above, when a huge firm stands to lose millions of dollars over a relatively small plot of property, it may be able to simply bribe a surveyor. However, the rightful landowner would not approve of such. After that, how can you strike a balance? You set it up such that the surveyor and the one who bribed or coerced them both stand to lose the most if they lie. If a surveyor, even inadvertently, provides an inaccurate survey, even by a little margin, our state's rules provide for substantial penalties. Additionally, they will not be able to conduct surveys in the state for the rest of their lives after losing their license. On top of that, they have a 10-year window before the occurrence happened to notify and reimburse all of its customers. At that point, the clients might ask the original surveyor to send a separate, independent surveyor to their location at no further cost to them. That includes all customers up to and including 10 years before the occurrence, as well as all customers thereafter. In the absence of evidence of bribery or blackmail, the former clients have the right to sue the surveyor for damages caused by alterations to the property line as a result of the survey and to charge them rent for any land that was unaccounted for during the survey. The party who bribed or coerced the surveyor would be held financially responsible for any damages and additional expenses that resulted from their actions. This, in addition to the time and money wasted in court and the overall inconvenience it causes, is why surveyors in my area will go to great lengths to avoid anything that even remotely resembles a property dispute. As you might expect, bringing a surveyor down here was not as simple as picking up the phone in the event of a dispute. That cost came as a surprise too. I suppose she paid them or something since they handed us the property boundary precisely as the UN defined it before we even located someone. I suppose she didn't tell them that there was one small bit she didn't like. Our land evidently extends up to her house, giving us a foot of space. Experimenting with it was a blast. That, however, was insignificant in comparison to the land that she is attempting to plunder. Now, every time we manage to locate a surveyor, she casually introduces herself, mentions that her section of the land has already been surveyed, and subtly suggests that there could be a property dispute at play. Any potential land surveyors would immediately think twice after seeing this. You must be wondering why after hearing the potential consequences for them. Oh, and by the way, the land markings that the bank surveyor had placed when we purchased the property mysteriously vanished right before we moved in. How handy. No? Well, I'm curious as to how it came to pass, but it did. Perhaps we will never find out. In any case, currently, the expense of hiring a surveyor, assuming we can locate one, would likely exceed the value of the land, if not exceed it. For reasons that should be readily apparent. After all, these people are essentially risking their lives for us. All of the quotations we've gotten thus far have been completely absurd. However, we are putting money aside in the hopes of hiring someone soon. The story's conclusion, which occurred only a few months ago, is now at our fingertips. Now that we have all the necessary background information, let's move on to the main event. So, a tree on the contested property was knocked down a few months ago by a severe storm. When this tree fell, it partially damaged the property of our neighbor across the street from us since it was so close to the road. Oh. And it smashed into someone's shiny new sports vehicle as they were zipping down the road. The cleaning took many days. But luckily no one was wounded. In that little amount of time, we received a charge in excess of $200,000. Far more than the value of our home and property following our repairs. Compliance with malicious influences. In case you were wondering, here is some additional background information. Damages to other people's property are usually not covered by most property or house policies. It doesn't matter if someone is on public property, such as a road, if you could have reasonably avoided the damage to your property. For instance, by trimming a tree close to the road before a storm. Then you are fully liable for the damages. Well, at least that's the case in my hometown. We contacted the insurance company of an unidentified wealthy individual when we received a claim for a destroyed sports vehicle and politely informed them that the tree that fell on their land did not belong to them. They wanted to know more about the situation so they could get back to us, so they questioned us. The insurance company sent us a second letter with the deed and a printout of our property lines about a week later. This time, the tree in issue was clearly marked in red, indicating that it was on our land. Within 30 days after their initial notification, they threatened to take legal action unless we paid in full. It had been around 2 weeks, give or take, when we contacted them again to clarify that the item in question did not belong on our property. The agent first argued with us, using words I won't use, explaining that it would take a complete moron to think the tree wasn't on our property and that it wouldn't matter how far off the property line it appeared to be on the printout. No one could possibly be that dim-witted to think it was that far off. They were only given the number of the surveyor that N had hired. They expressed their intention to reach out to the surveyor and do more investigations, but they stressed that we were given around 2 weeks to prepare the payment in the event that our claims could not be verified. Unfortunately, they never got back to us. Recall that I warned about the repercussions of providing inaccurate survey results. No amount of money could have compensated the surveyor for all of his potential losses, even if he had confessed to taking a bribe. At this time, he is likely to be required to depart from the nation. Because of this, we could rest assured that the insurance company would receive the same treatment from him as we did. After some time had passed, we decided to contact the insurance company to inquire about the matter further. The agent appeared pleased as they glanced over the notes, but they were unable to divulge too much information owing to confidentiality concerns. Nonetheless, they can inform us that N plainly challenged the claim, stating that the property did not belong to her, similar to how we did, and that the surveyor double-checked the findings with them. Furthermore, the insurance company had no grounds to suspect the results were inaccurate given that we did not contest the survey's findings and the surveyor was employed by them. Assuming we aren't going to challenge the findings, and should be held entirely responsible for any harm caused by the falling tree. Though we were content with it, they were unable to say anything further. Our expectations were roughly met. What comes next? From what you can gather from my history, it was not too difficult for me to pay the insurance company, even though they were clearly unhappy about it. It appears that they were able to pay it off without selling any more of their land. However, we are unsure of their savings or income. We have been mum on the subject of the property dispute ever since, but we are still thinking about putting money aside to pay a surveyor so we can reclaim our parcel of land. Right now, the property is less important than the concept behind the problem. However, we can now tell that she is not pleased with us anytime she looks at us. What gives her the right to complain about our giving her our land? She doesn't appear to be happy about it. LOL. She could try to spread rumors about us now, but it would likely backfire because we're friends with most of the neighborhood, and no one trusts N anymore after they discovered he was secretly stealing from everyone and did nothing to stop. We can only sit back and watch while the fires they created consume them, leaving them in a somewhat precarious position. Excited to witness the events that unfold. For those who are looking for a bit more excitement, here it is. We opted to install an invisible dog fence for our canine companions while we were thinking about constructing a privacy fence. In case you were wondering, it's just a little electrical cable that you bury. After that, you put a special collar around the dog's neck. When they approach too closely, it will make a noise that the dog truly dislikes. Continuing will cause the dogs to experience a minor electric shock. We needed convincing before we would even consider using a shock collar. One of us tested it out and reported feeling a tingling sensation that was neither painful nor unpleasant. Whatever the case may be, conditioning the dogs to respond to the beep before releasing them from its control as the recommended procedure. In a perfect world, the dogs would just hear the sound and immediately turn around, eliminating the need for shock altogether. To save our dogs from being housebound all day, we attempted this so that they could run around in our yard. Unfortunately, a real privacy fence was still out of our price range at that time. Partially because of its short length and partially because we wished to keep our dogs away from N's land, we had it well into our own. It seems like N mistook our marks for the location of our privacy fence since she inadvertently ran over them with her lawn mower, despite the fact that they were more than 5 feet beyond her stated boundary with B's land. Electrical lawn mowers aren't exactly acclimatized to dealing with live wires, as we discovered that day. She had utterly wrecked her mower. She had to go out and get a new mower since all of the electrical parts were broken. Basically, it was because she wanted to be spiteful and destroy our markings. The nicest thing is that she couldn't attempt to pin it on us because it was all over the property. Clearly, she made an effort to disseminate her rumors, but they fizzled out. Since blaming us would have been so foolish, she made no effort whatsoever. We were never even requested to get her a new mower. I suppose she anticipated our reaction if she did. Haha. All in all, I hope the narrative was enjoyable for you. I am planning to write another one about a separate matter, namely how my mother's willful compliance resulted in a loss of over $100 million for her firm and the permanent closure of her whole department. Be on the lookout for that story tomorrow or something. It's late, and I'm going to bed.